Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about some vocabulary from part of your textbook, and it relates to this next section, which has to do with atoms and molecules, and then we're going to relate that to formulas and chemical equations. So the particular view is basically taking a look at what's happening with an atom or molecule at that level. Okay, and remember, matter is something that makes up space, that takes up space, and has a mass. So in other words, all matter has to do with atoms. So what is an atom? An atom is basically the smallest unit, or the building blocks of matter. We know that atoms are composed of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons, where the protons and the neutrons are in the nucleus, and the electrons are on the outside. Matter that's composed of only one type of atom is considered an element. So for example, if you have a sample of gold, that's only made up of gold atoms. Or if you have a sample of iron, that sample of iron only contains iron atoms. Those are what we call elements. What happens when we have a substance that's composed of two or more elements that are bonded? Well, we call those compounds. And when they're bonded, they are bonded in a fixed proportion or ratios, where the numbers of atoms of that particular element doesn't change. The smallest unit of a compound is called a molecule. And remember that a compound is made up of two or more atoms that are chemically bound together. Chemically bonded together means that they're held together, but they're held together in a way where they're in fixed proportions. So in other words, if we take water, for example, water has a fixed proportion of 2 hydrogens to every 1 oxygen. That fixed proportion doesn't change. If it does change, then it's not water anymore. Chemical symbols are the letters that symbolize the elements. And there's a list of all the chemical symbols found on the periodic table. So for example, 2 examples would be H is hydrogen, that's the chemical symbol for hydrogen, and O is the chemical symbol for oxygen. Chemical formulas are words which are made up from chemical symbols and represent the atom types and how many of each there are in a molecule of a compound. The number is denoted using subscripts. Subscripts just means a number below the actual word here. So this 2 represents a subscript. This 3 represents a subscript. If you don't see any numbers, like in this case, right there, that just means that it's an understood 1. Chemical equations are like chemical sentences, which basically summarizes a chemical reaction. On the left side of this sentence, if you will, are what we call the reactants. In other words, what's reacting. On the right side are what we call the products, or what is produced. The arrow tells us the direction in which the chemical reaction is going, and it usually goes from left to right. If you see a big number in front, that big number is called a coefficient. It just tells you how many molecules there are of that particular item. In this case, we have 2 molecules of hydrogen. If you don't see a number, like in this case right here, that just means it's an understood 1. In other words, there's 1 molecule of oxygen. Remember, the 2, which is a subscript, tells us how many atoms of that particular element are in that either molecule or element. In this case, hydrogen is an element. Chemical reactions basically are summarized by chemical equations, and they represent breaking and forming of bonds, where there's a rearranging of atoms to form new substances. Okay? So going back to this idea here, we have hydrogen and oxygen, and when they combine together they make water, which is a completely new substance. So let's take a look at the particular model of this reaction. Particular model just means you're taking a look at it at the atomic or the molecular level of what's going on. We use drawings to model what's happening. So we have two hydrogens. That means we need to have two hydrogen molecules, which is denoted here. And over here is a legend, if you will, on what the colors stand for. So the black represents hydrogen and the red represents oxygen. Since there's nothing in front of the O2, that means I have one oxygen molecule. Therefore I have, since it's two, they're bonded together. Remember, any molecules are going to have bonds. Since it's a chemical reaction, these bonds are going to be broken and then formed on this side. And when they're formed on this side, the atoms are rearranged. So we have two water molecules which look like this. And as you can see, the oxygen atoms broke apart, and so did the hydrogen atoms. They broke apart to rearrange and make and form these two molecules of water. If we count up the number of atoms on both sides, we have four hydrogens, two oxygens on the reactant side, which is this side right here. And on the product side, we have four hydrogens and two oxygens on there. That means that since the numbers equal each other, we're balanced.